So I think what's key for me is that we create regenerative buildings, and you create buildings that are giving back more than they're taking from the environment. And really it's thinking about the next life of buildings and the bits of those buildings. And if we can think about that long-term view rather than just designing for now, then we can design out the concept of waste. So we're no longer having to demolish all our buildings and rebuild them, or we're not having to claim raw materials all the time, because we can use materials that are already being used in the buildings and components. So we get rid of waste and we get rid of the mining and all the impacts that has. I think what's really interesting is the idea that we, as consumers, we have to buy everything, and that responsibility goes from the manufacturer to us, to then be responsible for the rest of the life of that product. So we want some light in our offices so that we can see. We don't necessarily really want to buy all that stuff, because actually the lamps and all the fittings and everything are going to degrade. They're going to need upgrading when they're not as efficient as they were. They need to be disposed of at end of life, which is going to cost money, and actually, it's a special waste, so it has to be dealt with properly. And much better if we could return that to the manufacturer. So we can either have things like extended producer responsibility, which is, sort of I think is a simpler idea, or we can go for leasing, which is the Philips pay per lux idea, where you pay for a service basically. They come in, they fit all the lighting, they fit the best quality lighting, they tune it all beautifully, and then they say you're going to pay a monthly rent for your lighting service. Looking at cost, capital cost is always king. And we've always talked for a long time about looking at the whole life costs of our projects, but it's very rarely, in my experience, had any influence on actually capital costs. So, even when it's an owner-occupier client, they still have a capital cost budget to meet. So I think what's been interesting about the work we've been doing for UCL and others is that actually we found things that actually not only save you capital cost, but also save you the life cycle cost as well. And I think that's key. Things like relocatable partitions save in the long term, but also things like reusing components and things saves money now and in the long term as well. I think even just advising our clients on some of the practical things that I've talked about in my presentation, about things that save money and things that actually are more circular, we've been able to find lots of opportunities. We've sort of listed out about 100 opportunities and boiled them down to sort of 20 really cracking ones for both for the Crown Estate and for UCL Estates. So that's been great. And then actually winning the Moorfields Eye Hospital project with Penoy and Bassard off the back of, and part of the competition was about, we're going to apply the circular economy principles to this project, and that we're now just kicking that off, and it's fantastic to be involved right at the start, which very rarely happens for me as a consultant, to be able to say, these are the things we need to be thinking about: adaptability, design for assembly, and all those other ideas that we're putting forward. This principle of building layers or shearing layers is really useful for applying circular economy to buildings. It's because buildings are so complex and have thousands and thousands of different components, but also the layers have very different lifespans. So the structure and the shell of the building might be there for 50 to 100 years, whereas the interior might be just there for 2 years, or whatever the lifespan of the tenancy might be. And so you've got to apply very different principles really when you're looking at it. So you might do long life loose fit for the structure, but you might look at maybe substituting some of the technical materials and using biological materials for things like floor finishes and some of the internal fittings and things, because then you can return those, you can recognise that they have a short life and return them to the biosphere and to be composted. So I think it's really important. And I think this other point about being able to shear the layers and actually say, can we peel off the facade of the building without compromising the structure of the building? Can we get to the building services, which have a pretty short life, typically 20-year life, without damaging the finishes and things that we're putting onto the building?